Hello YouTube! Welcome again to another plant parenting vlog here on my channel. And in today's video, I want to talk about this plant. I want to talk about how I take care of this plant. I want to talk about kung paano ko siya napalaki ng ganito. On my previous video, I show you this. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to talk about the care tips about this plant kasi yung previous video ko is all about the plants that I have here. So, pag iniisa-isa ko yun, yung care tips, baka ilang oras tayo matatapos yung video na yun, di ba? Actually, meron akong a lot of friends and acquaintances as well. Nag-aas sila sa akin kung paano ko inalagaan tong mga plants na to. And how do I keep this plant continuously producing its new foliage. Dito, parang hindi na siya makikita yung mga new foliage niya kasi ang lalaki na ng mga older leaf niya. Ito. Dito sa inside of the canopy of this plant, there's actually a lot of developing new growth. Super excited ako sa plant na to na parang lumago pa. So yun nga, I decided na mag-create ng video about dedicated videos about each of the alocasias that I have here. Kasi even though alocasias are the same, parang tawag sa kanila lahat are alocasias, but definitely parang iba pa rin kasi yung requirements ng every genes nila. Like this one, iba yung requirement niya. Medyo may pagkaiba lang yung requirement niya compare sa ibang alocasia. So this one has different requirement as well. Merong pagkakaiba lang ng konti. Those little different can make significant difference talaga. But if you know how to take care of your plant. Now, I want to talk about the origin of this plant kasi hindi tayo pwede na magdirekta na lang dun sa let's say water requirements, soil requirements, like temperature, humidity, if we don't know exactly kung saan sila nanggaling. We have to know our plants. We have to know kung saan sila origin para in order for us as a plant parent na ma-understand ka sila kung bakit ganun yung mga requirements nila, right? So this specific plant, Alocasia reginula or a black velvet or other people call this as a jewel alocasia. This came originally from Southeast Asia. So basically, parang dito sa atin, but I don't think if this one originated from the Philippines. But what I have read sa article is that parang nanggaling talaga sila sa Indonesia or sa Borneo, so where there are thick layer of forests. So this Alocasia black velvet is, you can find this, yung natural habitat nila is under the canopy of a thick forest. So basically yun, they are not being exposed to harsh sunlight or harsh direct sunlight basically. Now you might ask, why is it that especially for the older leaves, bakit black? Bakit parang almost black or charcoal green na yung yung color niya? There are some over here like this one. This is just bagong leaves to, kaka-unfurled lang, as well as this one. I don't know kung makita nyo. So yung color niya sobrang light green pa lang. This is how this plant compensate with its natural environment, with its natural habitat. Kasi yung natural habitat of this plant is under the canopy of a thick forest. So yun, the way siya mag-compensate by its color kasi it's gonna absorb all the available lights on its surrounding. Kasi hindi siya pwedeng ma-direct sunlight kasi masusunog din siya. Probably there's layers of chlorophyll inside the foliages of this plant para intense yung absorption ng light. Yung light sa environment nila is not that abundant. So that's the reason why it has to have a lot of chlorophyll, which makes this plant super dark in color. For the water requirement of this plant, I just give them like 3 to 4 days na water. 3 to 4 days, ganun siya ka-frequent guys kasi yung plant ko, yung isang pot na to is made up of almost 10 growth. So ganito siya kalaki at ganito siya karami kasi ang daming. This is a group of plants. This is not a single plant. You cannot expect this Alocasia to be bushy like this, to have a canopy like this if meron lang kayong single plant. So yun, it has to be group of plants para maganito siya kalago or ganito siya kabushy. The watering requirement of this plant is more like on a drier side. That's the reason why kahit 3 to 4 days yung pagbigay ko sa kanya ng water, yung amount of water is just enough to moisten up the topsoil. So kahit ganito siya karami guys, yung binibigay ko sa kanyang water is like 3/4 cup of water lang. That is every 3 to 4 days ha. 3/4 cup of water, and then even lang dapat yung pag-distribute mo ng water. So, you have to make sure that 3/4 cup of water is evenly distributed all over the topsoil. Kasi by the pull of gravity, yung water will just go down the pot lang naman. But, so yun, the way I water this plant, I don't soak this plant with a lot of water. I don't know if that is the right thing to do, but basically it works, as you can see naman. So yun, I actually asked a lot of my friends kung bakit unfortunately namamatayan sila ng ganito. And I asked them questions about gaano sila kadalas mag-water, anong kadami yung water na binibigay nila sa plant na to. And most of them, sabi nila, binibigyan nila ng water every day. Ito nga, 3 to 4 days, tapos group of plants pa to. Tapos yung sa kanila, one plant lang, and it only has siguro mga 3 to 4 leaves, tapos everyday pa nilang lalagyan ng water. Basically, mamamatay talaga yon kasi this is a type of Alocasia that has a succulent characteristic. Yung kanyang leaves is super thick, super hard, which made up of almost water. Tapos yung stem niya, almost water din. So you don't want basically to put a large amount of water on this plant kasi mamamatay talaga sila. So just a very minimal amount of water lang talaga, just to moisten up the topsoil. Don't wait for the water to drain out dito sa drainage hole ng pot nyo. Especially if you only have one growth or one plant lang in one pot, please wait for it na mag-dry up talaga, or let's say 90% mag-dry up yung soil. Ito, nag-wait talaga ako na mag-dry out siya. Parang grainy, almost grainy na siya, but of course not totally parang bone dry na talaga. Parang ano lang, parang meron akong ma-feel na parang medyo moist pa, but not totally. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. Now, for the light requirement, this is basically yung sekreto ko. Okay, I'm just going to spill my secret. How did I make this specific plant? Actually, this is the first plant that I acquired. This is the group of plant that I acquired. Ito, parang recently lang. So, medyo yung leaves niya, medyo hindi pa ganun kalalaki compared dito. So, my secret on how to make this Alocasias big as this one is that never ever expose your plant to a direct sunlight. Yun lang. That's my secret. They want to be in a bright environment but not totally in a direct sunlight. Kahit golden hour pa yan or kahit super early in the morning. Kasi yung napansin ko sa Alocasias in general, if they are going to be exposed sa direct sun, parang maliliit yung foliage nila. But if you're going to put them in a shaded area, dun lumalaki yung mga leaves nila. That's my tip for you guys. Hope you learned something from this so far. Okay, for the temperature, this plant love to be in a very warm environment. Like, actually, my room can go up to 35 degrees Celsius, especially kung super init talaga. And the plants love that kind of environment, especially this plant. So you have to make sure lang na yung humidity is super high din. Okay? So they love to be in a very warm environment as well as in a very high humidity type of environment. So luckily, nandito tayo sa Pinas, so we don't have any issue when it comes sa humidity at when it comes sa warm kind of environment. Kasi dito sa atin, regardless of the season, summer season pa yan or wet season pa yan, super init pa rin dito, di ba? So fertilizer, to be honest, wala akong masasabi about fertilizer. I never fertilized this plant. Siguro compost lang, yun. And yung composition kasi ng plant, or I mean yung composition kasi ng soil is like 50% rice hull, 25% sand, and 25% compost or regular soil. Yun lang. Parang once the rice hull become decomposed, that will serve as a fertilizer na sa kanila. So basically, you don't really need to give them chemicals. Natural fertilizer is enough for them talaga. Like this one. To be honest with you, I never put any fertilizer on this plant. Pero look at this plant naman nila. Though, if you really want to put some fertilizer, some chemical fertilizers, 14-14-14 is enough for them. But you have to make sure lang that when you fertilize or when you dilute your fertilizer, half the strength lang yung ibigay nyo sa kanila. So, for example, so yung sa label, 1 tablespoon is equals to 1 liter. So, you have to perhaps double the water, the amount of water. 1 tablespoon to 2 liters of water. So, yun. Alright guys, so when it comes to pruning, ito, pinuprune ko talaga sila. Whenever I see old leaves na nagtuturn na into yellow. So yun, eto siya. Actually, kahapon ko siya na-prune. These are the very old leaves na talaga. So that is the mechanism of the plants na basically, they have to get rid or they have to let go of the older leaves in order to give way for the new ones. Naging ganito siya kasi kahapon ko pa to na-prune. Kahapon ko pa to na-cut dito. So, medyo super yellow na siya. But kahapon, when I prune this, parang hindi pa siya ganito ka-yellow. It's like, it's starting to get yellow pa lang. But isang araw na siya, naging ganito na. Whenever I see old leaves na parang nag-turn na into yellow, prune it right away so that you will give the plants the opportunity to focus on the development of the new foliage. Ito. These are the new foliage. New foliage. New foliage. And unflowering foliage. Ito. For the repotting, I don't know, you don't really want to repot this plant kasi this plant actually love to be root bounded. They love to embrace each other's root. So that's why it's like happy sila once they are root bounded. Especially if you purchase a plant tapos nilagay nyo sa agad sa way bigger plant, hindi nila gusto yun. Mas gusto nila na parang sa maliit lang sila na container and the root will just root bounded kasi mas mabilis yung pag-develop ng plant if they are a little bit root bound. So perhaps I will be repotting this plant next year or in the next 2 years pa kasi medyo happy pa naman sila dito. As I can see, I'm not going to repot this plant anytime soon. The best way to propagate this plant is through rhizomal division. So you have to divide the rhizomes, just dig in the bulbs and then put the bulbs sa ibang pot. I don't know, ayaw ko siyang i-propagate kasi I can see that this plant love to be together and I don't see any reason kung bakit i-propagate ko siya. So, dito lang siya. Yung Alocasia Black Velvet, ito sobrang toxic niya. So, you wouldn't want this plant if you have some kids. You don't want this plant if you have some cats and dogs around na mahilig kumain ng kahit ano-ano. So, perhaps you can consider other plants. So, it's better safe than sorry na lang. Buti na sa akin, wala naman akong animals dito, wala naman akong anak, so I don't care. The good thing about us here being in the Philippines or being generally in a tropical country is that this plant don't go dormant on us. We will have some problem perhaps if we live in an area where there is a winter season kasi they go dormant or sometimes they hibernate. When you say hibernate, yung parang namamatay yung foliage niya tapos natitira na lang yung bulb niya. And then that bulb, during the spring season, tutubo na naman siya. Dito sa atin sa Pinas, as long as you keep this plant in a very warm environment, wala tayong magiging problema with this plant being dormant or being sa hibernation of this plant. Wala tayong problema sa mga ganun-ganun. That is only applicable for those people who lives in a country where there is winter. So, sobrang lamig. This one is a tropical plant. They live all throughout the year in a tropical country as long as they are not being overwatered. Alright guys, so just a wrap up, just a summary of what I have just said. When it comes to watering, please don't overwater this plant. They are actually love to be a little bit more on a dry side. Don't expose them to direct sun. Put them in a shaded area where still it can receive some bright light. They would love to be in a fluorescent light or grow light if you have. For the temperature, they love in a warm environment. For the soil, as long as yung soil nyo is well-drained soil, wala tayong magiging problema doon. Regardless of what composition you have in your soil, as long as well-draining yung soil nyo. Now, for the humidity, they love high humidity. So basically, what you can do about that is you can, so konti lang yung pebbles, but actually I have a lot of pebbles over there. So in a plate, you can put some water in this and then some pebbles and then put the plant on here and then put them sa warm area so that yung water mag-evaporate and that will serve as a humidifier for your plants. Or the most natural way is to keep them together. By keeping them together, that's actually a very natural way kasi they would help each other to humidify each other. Fertilizer, organic fertilizer is enough. And that's the wrap up of my care tips for this Alocasia. That's just a summary of how I take good care of this Alocasia, how I make them big as this, and how I keep them continuously producing new foliage. So yun lang guys, sobrang simple lang talaga siya as long as you know how to take care of them. Know your plants. I can't stress that enough, so that you would understand kung bakit ganun yung mga requirements nila, especially with this type of plants. So that will be all for now, and see you again on the next one. Bye-bye.